Hello, everyone, and welcome to my talk today. The title of my talk is Increase Application Confidence Using CI/CD and Infrastructure as Code. And in this talk, I'll be discussing how developers can leverage testing strategies such as smoke testing, CI/CD, and infrastructure as code to ensure that their applications are even more bug tested than the usual, testing such as unit testing, load testing, performance testing. So here's the agenda for today's talk. I'm going to introduce myself, of course. Then I'm going to be speaking about smoke tests and what they are and the value that they bring to software development. And then I'm going to be going in a little bit deeper in and talking about how smoke tests, CI/CD, and infrastructure as code can be leveraged by developers, right, to ensure that their applications are basically fully tested and they're also tested efficiently, right? We're also going to cover topics such as, pre and post deployment, using smoke tests to kind of suss out any kind of errors, pre or post deployment. And then I'm going to show you a quick demo of how you can easily implement smoke tests into your CI/CD pipelines and also leverage infrastructure as code to build out brand new infrastructure, right, such as a Kubernetes cluster on GCP, deploy that application, and then actually, see that your smoke test can run and make sure that the application is functional within the target environment, and then destroy all of that infrastructure. So it's going to be a pretty cool demo if the demo gods are with us today. So let's go ahead and talk about smoke testing. No, disregard. Let's talk about me for a moment. So my name is Angel Rivera. I'm a developer advocate for CircleCI. And I started my career off in the United States Air Force and started programming there professionally. But now I work for CircleCI as a developer advocate, and it's a really cool job. I get to talk to folks in the community about how they're using technology. I am also learning about all the new technology out there, right? So not only am I, engaging with awesome developers, I also get to see what's out there in the industry, right? What people are doing with any new processes that they're using. And then I bring that information back to CircleCI, generally the engineering and product teams, and then I inform them of what's going on out there in the industry and the community. They then use that information to build out new features and products that are super useful and valuable to our developers. So basically, it's almost like, intel gathering, right? And bringing back information so that our teams can build our customers and our users some awesome features that add value to their lives and help them get their work done faster. But obviously, COVID-19 kicked in. Normally I'm at tech events such as conferences and meetups and hackathons. But yeah, since COVID-19 came about, I'm doing these things online, which is awesome these days. But I also do miss, the grip and grin in the grassroots kind of interactions with folks at conferences. But let's move on to smoke testing. So I was looking up the origin of the word smoke test as it relates to software development, and I couldn't really find any. There was a couple theories out there, but I will say that when I was in high school, I used to work in the summers, right, with contractors, and some of them were plumbers, and so I did a little bit of plumbing work when I was younger. And it was pretty cool. I always thought that smoke testing, right, software kind of came from what plumbers do. And if for those of you that don't know, plumbers, when they, build out new plumbing in houses or wherever kind of projects they're doing, the way that they test, instead of, once they, maybe make a connection or seal two fittings together or two pipes together using a fitting, usually if it's, let's say, a water, old copper style water, plumbing, they'll solder that together and then instead of running water through it, right? You would think, okay, they're going to test it with water. They don't. They test their most plumbers, or at least the ones I worked with, tested their, like a quick test. They tested it using smoke, right? So they would have a machine that, or some sort of canister that would expel smoke, and then that would be fed into the pipe. Now, the idea behind that is, as you can see in the picture, if the smoke kind of leaked out of those joints that they just soldered, then you would see, that then they would know that you have a failed weld somewhere there, and they need to redo it, right? So basically, it's a simple way to test their plumbing without having to run water or whatever. Now, later on down the road, right, they'll actually do pressure testing as well to make sure that there's no air coming out, right, of the pipes. So remember, these are simple tests that plumbers use to test their work before they kind of certify that it's done. Now, when you're talking about software, same rules apply, right? So there are tests that we do that are very expensive. They're very, comprehensive and complex, and they take a lot of time. So smoke tests do in software is the same kind of thing that the plumbers were doing, right? Simple tests, quick, simple tests to make sure that the work they're doing is okay, so they can proceed to the more complex things in that same project. So smoke tests are basically simple preliminary testing that reveals failures. And again, this is to avoid having to run expensive tests that take a lot of effort and time from developers, right? So smoke tests kind of just suss out anything that's, what we call low-hanging fruit, right? The simple things that you could do. Something like, hey, the test could do something like stand up a server and run let's say a GET request against it and check for a OK200 response, right? These are kind of the concepts behind smoke testing. And by the way, smoke testing are also they should be limited in scope, meaning they should be designed to run fast. So that means you don't do a lot of heavy duty compute kind of testing. You save that for things further on down the road, something like a performance test or load balance or a load test, something like that. So again, smoke tests are designed to suss out any failures or any bugs or any errors early on in your software testing cycle, and then it'll flag that release as failed, and you will not deploy it, or should not deploy it, right, to any environments. So smoke testing also helps you avoid any unknowns, right? Just like any testing, nothing different there. I get this a lot too. So when should I run smoke tests? And my answer is every time any code changes, right? So just like in a regular CI/CD pipeline, you definitely want to leverage, if you're using any kind of CI/CD, you want to leverage that platform to go ahead and run your smoke tests early on in your pipeline. Now we're going to get to talk about what about smoke testing and deployments, right? But in general, run your smoke tests on every CI/CD run, right? Regardless if you're doing a test for deployment or bugs, or if you're doing just regular old, testing a server locally, same thing, right? Run your smoke tests on every CI/CD run. Yeah, now let's talk about smoke testing deployments, right? When this is in kind of in the vein of when you're a developer, you package up your application into a Docker container, and then you hand it off over to either an operator, or it just goes down the pipeline in automation and gets deployed. And then once it's deployed in the target environment, let's say it's QA, it starts acting wacky and it's not behaving the way you expected it to, or the way that it behaved in your previous CI/CD pipelines. So let's talk about smoke testing and looking for errors during pre and post deployment, right? So one way you could leverage, infrastructure as code to help with your smoke testing, because let's say, again, I'm using the example of deployment. So that means you packaged up that application and then you deployed it somewhere. Now, with infrastructure as code, you could actually deploy it to a real environment that you're actually targeting, right? So if you're going to deploy this application into let's call it a GCP, GKE cluster, right? Kubernetes cluster, then you could leverage infrastructure as code to provision and stand up that whole environment, right? in your CI/CD pipeline, and then deploy that application into that cluster, and then run your smoke tests from your CI/CD pipelines, right? So a lot of folks are not doing this, which is okay, but I think in the future you're going to see a lot more people leveraging this automation to perform smoke tests, and using infrastructure as code as well, by the way. So again, the question here is, do I run my smoke tests pre or post deployments? My answer to that is I say both, right? You want to know, let's say, pre-deployment, you're deploying it to maybe a QA and maybe another testing environment, right? And you want to make sure that that application is performing as designed in those environments. Now, I will say this though, is it overkill? No. And the reason is, it gives you the insight into the behaviors for that application in its target environments. And this is in real time, right? So you're getting this solid information and feedback, as smoke tests are supposed to provide you, about this application and its when it was installed into the target environment, and then it's operating within that target environment, and then you're getting that feedback from your smoke test, right? And it's telling you, hey, this application is performing nominally, or it's not, and then you go back and fix it. So let's go ahead and recap. Definitely, right, use automation. Devise some sort of smoke testing, right? Simple in scope. Remember, it's supposed to run quickly to give you fast feedback on the application. For servers, go ahead and run a slew of tests against it to make sure that it's responding the way you expect it to. And again, it'll uncover all the low-hanging fruit, all these bugs that are probably sitting there, and they're simple to fix, right? And that helps with having, you saving some time and effort without, when you're hitting these low-hanging fruit or grabbing these low-hanging fruit, you're definitely not spending a lot of time, money, or effort in exhaustive testing, right? You're going to have to do that. But in the beginning, you just want to know, hey, is this thing working the way I designed it? And as a developer, that's really nice feedback to get back through automation. And you'll have that valuable insight and that warm, fuzzy feeling that as a developer, I know that this application ran in a Docker container inside of a Kubernetes cluster per my expectations, right? So when you have that nice, flow from, inception testing, unit testing, smoke testing, and then you can go into that complex pipeline of maybe doing some more rigorous testing, such as performance testing, and then maybe even some load testing. That just increases the confidence in that release, right? So now your teams know, just because it's in your pipeline, right? Your teams know that this application and this release has been run through the ringer in the target environments that they're going to be deployed to. And I have to say, when I started adding smoke testing to my, development practices, it's certainly increased confidence in the application. And again, release managers were super, comfortable with releasing the code that I had written, because again, it was there was proof that this thing ran, nominally as expected. And it also helps with faster release cycles as well, right? So you don't have to do a lot of code review, that much more code review to make sure that these deployment tests were checked off, right? So yeah, this is not the end of the talk. I'm going to go ahead and jump into the demo. So let's go ahead and I'm going to show you some code, and then I'm going to show you how to leverage CircleCI, infrastructure as code, and then deploying and smoke testing, right, in one pipeline. Hello, everyone. And now I want to show the demo that I was speaking of earlier in my talk. So what I have here is a repository of code for a simple Python application. This is Python Flask, so it's basically a server application that'll serve up a simple web page. Now, the focus of this is not the actual application. It's just showing, how to package up an application into Docker container and deploy it using infrastructure as code, as well as smoke testing it once it's deployed. So real quick, let's look at the smoke test itself, right? So I have a folder here within the repo, and it has a smoke test. Now, this smoke test is basically a framework that was built by a man named Alexander on GitHub that I found. So Alex, his handle is ASM89, and the project is smoke.sh. And again, it's a simple bash shell type framework for creating smoke tests, which I really like because a lot of the stuff we do in CI/CD is bash related. Anyway, so check out his project. It's pretty cool, and I use it in mine. So what we're going to do is go back to the code, and again, just quick show you what's going on. So what's going to happen is I'm going to make a change to some code in the application itself. Then it's going to get pushed up to GitHub. CircleCI will detect the change. It'll kick off my build pipeline. And then once that happens, it's going to basically build the application and then test it, run some really simple unit tests on it. Then it's going to go ahead and package it up into a Docker image. And then the deployment pipeline will then go ahead and kick off a Pulumi, which is an infrastructure as code company. The nice thing about them is if you want to write your infrastructure as code in a programming language, you can. I highly suggest you check them out. But you can also use another company tool called, another company's tool called from HashiCorp, right? The company's called HashiCorp. And their tool is called Terraform, which is very similar to Pulumi, except that they use a proprietary language called HCL, which, really simple to read and use as well. But I'm going to use Pulumi in this one. So at the end of the day, we have this application, right? And it's called Hello World Pi. I'm going to update this version to kick off my CI/CD pipeline on CircleCI. So I'm going to save it. And I'm going to jump over to a terminal so I can do a git status, right? Make sure, see what's going on with my repo. Okay, great. So I'm going to git commit. And then from here, I'm going to just tell it to commit this file. And then we're going to go ahead and give it a message. So this is say testing version 009, I believe it was, right? Cool. So now let's kick off this pipeline on CircleCI. So we should jump over to CircleCI. And now, CircleCI picked up my build, started running my pipeline. And within that pipeline, right, I call it the workflow that it's running is basically build, test, deploy. And as you can see here, you have 3 jobs, right? Build, test, build, push image, and then this is the deploy to GCP. So this is basically 3 jobs within the pipeline. So if I click in here, I could show you what that looks like, right? Now my initial unit tests, right, have passed. So I know that the application that I'm pushing or building a Docker image of, right, is been tested with my unit test. So I have a pretty good high confidence in the application being tested, again, using my unit test. So that's really good. And it's really fast, right? So look, it took 15 seconds to test that application. Now it's going to build and push the image, right, or the application to a Docker image, and then that's going to get pushed up to Docker Hub. So now that all the dependencies were installed in the actual executor or the runtime, Pulumi has now stood up, and it's actually installing or creating, using the infrastructure as code to create and provision this new GKE cluster. So if we jump over to the Google Cloud Platform, right now I have 0 clusters, right? If you look here, refresh once or twice. But now Pulumi has started to build out a new cluster for me so that we can then run some smoke tests. As you can see here, it's being created. And if we dig deep inside, right now, the cluster, again, it takes a few moments, so I'll be pausing that, but basically, right, it's configuring it now, it's adding nodes, and we'll come back in a moment to see when it's all completed. Great, so now our Pulumi provisioning process for our GKE cluster and our application deployment has been completed. And as you can see in the standard out here, you can see what's going on, right? So Pulumi update is the command to kick off a provisioning. And then it uses the code that's in my repo, right? So if you go into the Pulumi GCP GKE folders, you'll have all that source code in Python that will go ahead and deploy the application. So at the end of all this, we should have a functioning server, right? And let's go ahead and do that. But before we test the application, I do want to show you that right now I have the smoke test running, and it actually ran. So this is really cool right here. So this is the actual smoke test, right? So remember, we created a whole new cluster. We deployed this application into a Docker container into that Kubernetes cluster, and our CI/CD pipeline tested this IP address, right? So it's the same IP address that we saw here, right here, yeah. So the pipeline knows to go ahead and test it, and it did, right? So here we go. It tested the application. It got a 200 response, and remember we were testing that the body contains this text, right, and the version number text, and it worked. And then finally, the cool thing about it is it successfully completed, and now we have about 5 minutes, for this thing to live. Now, I just set it for 5 minutes before this demo, but you could set it for less time. And then what will happen is a destroy command will occur. But let's go ahead and test the application while it's up. So I'm going to paste the IP address there, and sure enough, we have the application running, and it's version 9, right, in GKE in a cluster. And if you want to see a little bit how that looks, we could do that as well. So here's your cluster, and you should be able to see some information like the pool. There's a default pool we're using, and then we're also going to be looking at workloads. So that'll tell us how many nodes we have in our cluster for the container to run on. And I have 3 nodes right now, right? This was all created in infrastructure as code. And then we can go back to the pipeline. Right, so our application has basically kicked off its termination for Pulumi, right? So basically Pulumi has a command to destroy all the stuff that it created. So since Pulumi created all this stuff and it's specified in code and maintained in code, it knows what it created and it can destroy all of the resources in the cloud, right? So again, this is helpful for basically ensuring that you have a solid test in the target environment that your deployment will run in, which is the Kubernetes cluster. So, and then leveraging infrastructure as code and smoke testing to basically put that, seal of approval or stamp of approval on the application and its release. Again, speeding up the software development process, and also giving your release managers a really good sense that this application has been thoroughly tested and vetted, and it should behave the way that you expect in the target environments that you will be deploying to. So now, as you can see, our Kubernetes cluster is no more, and it was all destroyed within the CircleCI pipeline that we used for this project. And again, we ran our smoke test in it, which is right here, and we also destroyed all of the resources that we built using infrastructure as code. So I think this is it for now. I want to thank you all for showing up and watching this talk and this demonstration. And if you need to get in touch with me, my Twitter handle is @punkdata, or you can hit me up on GitHub at the same thing, @punkdata. So thank you very much, and goodbye.